So before I start this video, I would ask you learners to please like, share and subscribe to Mad Learning. Also hit the bell icon so that you will be notified about our future videos. With that said, let's begin our lecture. Hello guys, Shamir here with another Mad Learning video. So today our topic is going to be the conduction system of heart. So I have previously made a few videos about anatomy and physiology of heart, and I've also made videos on the anatomy and physiology of blood and blood vessels. So if you want to refer to those videos, then please click on the I button on the left side of the screen and it will take you to those videos. As for our topic for today, I'm going to discuss the basic anatomy and physiology of the cardiac conduction system, and I'm also going to talk about the inherent mechanisms and the inherent processes that regulate the cardiac conduction system. So I hope you will enjoy this lecture and learn something from it. So what is the cardiac conduction system? Cardiac conduction system is basically the system which is regulated by these specialized cardiac muscle cells. So cardiac cells are not the same as compared to other cells of the body like skeletal muscle cells or like neurons or like even kidney cells or different cells of the body. They are very different as compared to other cells. This is why the cardiac conduction system is essentially different from other systems of the body, because it has these specialized cardiac muscle cells and they provide a pathway for the cardiac excitation that progresses through the heart. So let me just first move to the objectives, and I will first list the objectives of the lecture so that we know what we are going to be talking. So first of all, I'm going to review the important terms related to the conduction system of heart. So we are going to keep it very simple in the beginning, and I'm going to talk about a few important terms so that we know what we are talking about in the next few important concepts that we need to understand after this. And I'm also going to be reviewing the action potential. What does action potential mean and what are its phases? We are going to be talking about that. And finally, I'm going to be reviewing the anatomy and physiology of the cardiac conduction system. So let us just start, and basically we are going to talk about what does conduction mean. So conduction is basically the transmission of impulses from one cell to another cell. So I think this is self-explanatory, and you can understand that when the impulses are being transmitted from one cell to another, this is what refers to conduction. And this is basically the mechanism that is happening within the cardiac cells as well, that they are transmitting these electrical impulses from one cell to another, and they are very, very efficient when it comes to the conduction of these impulses or the transmission of these impulses. And this is basically what the term conduction means. And if we move to the next term, what does rhythm mean? And rhythm is basically the regular and repeated pattern of movement. And rhythm is a term, is a word that is very much associated with heart. And what is the basic meaning of rhythm? Rhythm is a regular and repeated pattern of movement. So when we talk about heart, we are talking about a rhythmic contraction, or we are talking about a repeated pattern of movement that is happening within the heart. And this is how essentially the heart performs its functions so efficiently and so regularly. Therefore, the term rhythm is important to understand, and therefore the heart cells regulate the rhythm. So we now understand the two terms conduction and rhythm. Conduction is the transmission of impulses and rhythm is the regular and repeated pattern of movement, something that is happening regularly and at repeated intervals of time. So what is the conduction system of heart? Conduction system of heart is an internal system or intrinsic system, like I said before, and it functions by generating and transmitting the electrical impulses. So what is happening in the cardiac conduction system? There are electrical impulses that are being generated and being transmitted within these cells, and as a result of these electrical impulses being generated and transmitted, what happens is that the contraction of the heart happens, and then they also regulate the rhythm. So what is happening is that these electrical impulses are stimulating the contraction of heart and also regulating the rhythm of its contraction. So I hope you understand this basic definition, and if I move to the next slide, we are going to talk about how is an impulse generated. So we have talked about that. We have talked about the cardiac conduction system. We have talked about the basic definition. We have talked about a few terms. Now, how is an impulse generated? So impulse is generated, produced through a mechanism which is called the action potential. And this is very important to understand because this lies to the core of the cardiac conduction system. and this is what happens within the cells and how they generate an impulse and how that impulse is being transmitted to the other cells of heart. Or this action potential basically represents the change in electrical potential that occurs across a cell membrane when the excitation occurs. So what is happening during an action potential? Action potential is basically the change in the electrical potential that occurs across the cell membrane. So we know the concept of the resting membrane potential, and we know that cells have a resting membrane potential, which basically means that they have a certain accumulation of ions outside the cell and inside the cell membrane. And this refers to the electrical potential of the cell, also called the resting membrane potential of the cell. And what happens during the action potential is that this resting membrane potential is changed, or this resting membrane potential is altered, and therefore the action potential happens and or excitation occurs. So I'm going to talk about action potential in a bit of detail. And basically what action potential is that it has three phases. Action potential is three important phases which we are going to talk about, and they are the resting phase, the depolarization, and the repolarization phase. And if we talk about the resting phase is basically the phase in which the cardiac cells are more negative on the inside and more positive on the outside. So I talked about the concept of the resting membrane potential, and during the resting membrane potential, the membrane potential consists of more positive ions on the outside and more negative ions on the inside. And this is referred to as the membrane potential, or basically we can say that the cardiac cells generally are more negative on the inside and more positive on the outside. So this is what the resting membrane potential or the resting stage is, that the cardiac cells are more negative on the inside and more positive on the outside. But if we talk about depolarization, what happens during depolarization? During depolarization, the positive ions move inside the cell. Therefore, the resting membrane potential or the membrane potential of the cells change. That is, what is happening is that if I read the statement, then during the depolarization phase, the membrane potential of the cell membrane changes from more negative to more positive, and the sodium ions move. So how do the sodium ions move? The sodium ions move via the voltage gated sodium channels that are present on the cell membrane, and these sodium ions are moving inside via these voltage gated fast sodium channels that are opening, and the sodium ions move inside, and therefore the membrane potential changes, which is the and essentially this membrane potential is around minus 90 millivolts, and it changes and becomes more positive because more positive ions are moving inside. And this is the process, and this is the process where the depolarization is happening. And due to this process, the heart cells contract, and essentially the heart as a whole contracts due to this phase of the action potential that is happening. So if we move to the repolarization phase, what happens? So the depolarization phase has occurred, the heart has contracted. Now these cells need to go back to their normal membrane potential or the resting membrane potential, and this happens during the process called the repolarization phase. And if I read this statement, it says that it occurs when the cell returns to its normal membrane potential, that is, the sodium ions move out. So we know that the sodium ions are abundant within the cells, but during the repolarization phase, these potassium ions move outside the cell, and as a result, the repolarization phase occurs, and they move outside via the voltage gated potassium channels, and therefore the membrane potential again changes to the resting membrane potential, which was before the depolarization phase occurs, and as a result they return to their normal membrane potential. And this is basically the core of what is happening during the action potential. We have three phases. We have action potential, we have resting stage, we have depolarization stage, and we have the repolarization phase. And the ions are moving in and out and causing these phases to occur. So if I move to the next slide, we have this graph in which we can clearly see the action potential phase and its different phases which are happening during the action potential phase. And if we look at the left side, we can see the voltage on the left side and the resting membrane potential, which is around minus 70 millivolts, is mentioned here, and it changes to plus 40 millivolts when the action potential is at its peak. So if we go step by step and we see the diagram, we can see that the action potential is, we can see that the membrane potential is at its resting phase, and then during the first phase or the depolarization phase, a stimulus is achieved, or a stimulus activates the depolarization phase. And then we have a curve in which the voltage is moving to the positive side and the sodium ions are moving inside due to the opening of the voltage gated sodium channels, and this is called the depolarization phase. And the voltage gated sodium channels open and the sodium ions move inside the cell, and this goes to around plus 40 millivolts when the action potential reaches its peak, or the depolarization phase reaches its peak. And then there is like a plateau phase, or like a sustaining phase, in which the depolarization phase sustains itself and then it goes down again during the repolarization phase, or the third phase. And in this phase, as we mentioned before, the potassium ions move out, and because of the movement of potassium ions outside, the voltage goes down and the membrane potential returns to its normal phase, which is also called the resting membrane potential. And we can say that the curve is going down and the membrane potential is going back to the normal membrane potential, which is also minus 70 millivolts. And we can see that the curves goes down a little bit more, and it goes to more negative as compared to the normal membrane potential. And this is essentially because of the movement of the potassium ions which are moving outside the cells. And after that, after the phase 4, which is the hyperpolarization phase, the resting membrane potential is achieved, and this is the final phase of the action potential. And we can see that again the same process continues. I hope you understand this concept. If I move to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the cardiac conduction system. Where is the cardiac impulse generated and how it is transmitted throughout the heart? So the electrical impulses within the heart are basically initiated in the SA node or the sinoatrial node. And this SA node is basically located in the right atrial wall, and it is also called the primary pacemaker of the heart, and it is responsible for generating these impulses and transmitting them to the whole of heart in a rhythmic and a very efficient manner. So first what happens is that the cardiac impulses are being generated by the SA node, which is located on the left atrium, and then they are being transmitted from the left atrium to the right atrium via the Bachmann's bundle. And this is essentially called the Bachmann's bundle because it was discovered by a scientist named Bachmann, and therefore it is called the Bachmann's bundle. And this happens simultaneously because the left and the right atrium have to contract at the same time. Therefore, the impulses are generated at the SA node and they are transmitted immediately via the Bachmann's bundle to the left atrium, and they both contract together. Now what is happening next is this. So the impulses that are produced by the SA node are being conducted to the lower part of the heart via these internodal pathways. Headquarter or the SA node is transmitting its impulses to the other parts of the heart. So this is like the second phase. And if I move to the next slide, we have the third phase of the cardiac conduction system is the AV node. And what happens is that the internodal pathways transmit their impulses to AV node, which is located on the interventricular septum. So basically the sinoatrial node transmits these impulses via the internodal pathways to the AV node. What happens next? And AV node is also called the secondary pacemaker of the heart. So what happens that next is that the AV node transmits its impulses to the AV bundle or the bundle of His, and this is located on the interventricular septum, and this is also called as the tertiary pacemaker of the heart. If the AV node and the SA node fail, then the bundle of His can become the primary pacemaker of the heart. It transmits impulses at a rate of around 15 to 20 minutes per 50 to 20 times per minute. So if I move to the next slide, after the bundle of His or the AV bundle, it basically divides into two internodal pathways or two main pathways, which are called the right bundle branch and the left bundle branch. And these two pathways are located inside the interventricular septum, and they divide into two parts, and they are located inside the interventricular septum, and they are responsible for furthering passing down the electrical signal to the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So if I move to the next slide, the last part of the cardiac conduction system consists of the Purkinje fibers, and these are located inside the walls of the left ventricle and the right ventricle, and they are responsible for the conduction of electrical signals to each and every terminal point of the cardiac conduction system, or each and every terminal point of the heart, and therefore they transmit these impulses to all different parts of the heart, especially the ventricles. So I hope you like this video, and if you want to see future videos like this, and if you want to see more future videos like this, then please like, share and subscribe to Med Learning. Also hit the bell icon so that you will be notified about our future videos. So with that said, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.